Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. Welcome to an intro to Redux with React. If you look in the video description, there is a link to this repo. If you're watching afterward, you can probably follow along. If you try to follow along now, I might be going a little bit fast, but that's okay. But main idea is we're going to talk about first, what is application state? What is Redux? We're going to look at a diagram of how everything works. And then I have an existing app built with Redux that we're going to convert into an existing app built with React in the built-in state, and we're going to convert that to Redux. Hey, James, welcome to the stream. William, welcome to the stream. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun time. And if you look at this repo, there's a folder called No Redux, and I have 3 super basic apps, all built with React, and using the built-in state. I believe all of them except for one have a few nested components, but they're pretty basic apps, and then we're going to see what that looks like building those same apps with Redux. Prerequisite for this video is you do know a little bit about how to build React apps. I did do an intro to React video, and that is, I talk about more like what are the concepts and how do you create an app and things like that. And then I also did this front-end showdown where I kind of compared all the different front-end frameworks, so you can check that out. But then also, if you're totally new to everything, I made a video on what is application state, where I built an application with vanilla JavaScript and then really talked about how could we refactor it or rewrite it to use a state management pattern. And then I wrote the same app with Vue.js. If you do like Vue.js, there also is, I think I have one on state management and component hierarchy. So this one is about state management in Vue.js and how to incorporate ViewX. And then I also have a video on ViewX itself. All of these things having to do with managing state in your front-end applications. So that's kind of a prerequisite for this. You have an idea of what state is. You've built React apps before. And yeah, we're going to get into it. Welcome, Jibs. Welcome, Emmy, Magneto, Bob. Welcome to the stream. This is going to be a fun time. Emmy says congrats on the 1,000. Thank you very much. Yeah, and James in the chat says Dan Abramov is a real hero. So that is a great introduction to Redux itself. So if you go to redux.js.org, this is all about Redux, and Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. What does that mean? You're about to find out. But it was written by Dan Abramov, and he actually did a full getting started with Redux video series on echet.io. So you can learn from the creator of Redux itself how to use it and what's involved with it. Yeah, that's the main thing. All right, to my code. First off, what is application state? So I'll give a quick overview, but like I said, I have done videos on this before. But essentially, everything that changes in your UI can be represented in state. So let me just fire up this simple to-do app that I have. So in the no Redux folder, I have this to-do app. I've already installed the dependencies, so I'll install them again. I can do yarn start. It's a basic to-do app, so we can do things like, say, learn Redux, click add to-do, adds it to the list. We can mark to-dos as done. We can remove to-dos if we have multiple to-dos. Learn state. We can mark all of them as done. So if multiple of them were not done, we could press this button and it marks them as done. But in thinking about application state, what are the things that are changing on this page? First, you have the user input. So like when they're saying learn something, this is the state, a part of the state of the application, like what has the user entered. So keeping track of this would be one thing that we have in state. The other thing is the list of to-dos. So we need to keep track of what to-dos are actually on the page. So that's part of state as well. The other thing is the specific information about each to-do. So like whether or not the to-do is done or not. So all of these things can just be represented with plain JavaScript. So like this is just a string. This is an array of objects. Those objects have a property title and a property done, which is true or false. So when thinking about state, you essentially look at your application and think about what are the things that are changing, and that is what needs to go in state. So that's what application state is, and that is what Redux is going to help us manage. Cool. And Professor Elements, welcome to the stream. Okay, so general idea, like I said, I've done a video on it before, but really anything that's changing in your UI, you can think of that as state, and all of that could go in one place called state. So basic introduction to application state. Now let's talk about Redux. So on the site itself, it said it is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. There are a lot of different diagrams out there. I have one that I'll show you. It, I think, tells little lies. Like, it's not totally like really what's happening, but I think it's a good overview picture of what's happening with Redux. So first, and at the top, is the store. So this is all of your application's state and data. So in a React app, components can have their own state. You could actually have multiple components. Each component could have their own state. In a Redux app, you take the state of all of your components and put it in one place, the store. And there are some exceptions, like you might have some components that have their own internal state, but for the most part, and when you're first learning this and wrapping your mind around it, think about every component you have that has state inside of it. All of that is going to get moved into the Redux store. So the store is the source of truth. All of that state is up at the top. You then have a provider. A provider will make things from the store available to your components. So now that you've pushed all of this state up, you need to get it back into your components. That's what the provider is going to allow you to do. You then have this idea of containers. So in working with Redux, there are container components, and then there are presentational components. A container component is connected to the store. It knows how to get state. It knows how to get actions which update state. It knows things about the store. Presentational components are dumb components. They only get their information from props. They have no idea that the store exists. So your container is connected to the store. And then whenever the application state changes, your UI is re-rendered. So if a user enters into an input, UI re-renders. If a user clicks a submit button, UI re-renders. But essentially, this is the view that the user sees. And so the user will be interacting with the UI. And when they do something, when they interact with the UI that would change state, you fire off what's known as an action. And an action has a name, a specific name of what is about to change in the store. So your action will have the name and then also a payload. So that's whatever is changing in the store, what should it change to? So something happens in the UI, like a button click, or they're typing into input, an action gets fired with that information. What is the type of action and what's the payload? And then you have your reducers. So reducers look at all of the incoming action types, and they decide how to update the state based on the action type that got fired off. This is my break timer. Let's take a quick stretch. We're just getting started, but this is going to be a fun time. So reducers, they're looking at all the action types and deciding what to update, what specifically to update on your state. So a specific reducer will get chosen. It will update the state. It will dispatch that, hey, state has changed. The store will update its state to have the latest values, and then it all flows back down. So the container now gets the latest value, which then gets represented in the view, and then the user sees the latest action, or sorry, the latest results of some action. And this is the flow of Redux. This is known as unidirectional data flow. So data always flows in one direction. It comes from the store, through the provider, to the containers, to the UI. User interacts with the UI, that fires off actions which go into reducers, which then update the store, and the cycle repeats. Unidirectional data flow. So that is what Redux is in a nutshell. Let me look at my thing here. So talk about what Redux is. I feel like really the best way to explain these things is to actually use them and write the code to do them. So for the most part, I'm gonna leave it to just writing the code to make these things happen. And then you'll kind of see where these concepts fit into play. And I will be leaving the apps that don't have Redux in them, so we can kind of compare, like, what does an app look like that uses built-in state versus an app that uses Redux. And just to spend a second on this idea of container components. So there is this built-in method in Redux called connect, or it's actually in React Redux. And what it allows you to do is take a state and actions from the store and pull them into your component as props, so that you can actually use the store, the single source of truth. And the main idea is Your container components are usually at the top level. That's going to be like your home page, your about page, your search page. Like these are the things up at the top. They're containers connected to the store. And then they might have subcomponents, but those subcomponents don't know about the store. They are just getting their data as children through props from the container. And I'm calling them dumb components. They're also known as presentational components, but they're simply just components that have a render function. They have no special methods on them or internal state. They just present a UI given some props. Okay, we covered the basics. I did show this diagram, and I will link to it in the README, but there's also this one that kind of floats around, and it's a similar idea. So let's refresh it to the beginning. Okay, so you have your initial state, no dollars in your account. You click one of the buttons, that fires off either the deposit action or the withdraw action. That goes to a dispatcher, which then goes into your reducer with the action that just happened and the previous state. Your reducer will take that action and the previous state and update it, and then that state flows into the UI. So this unidirectional data flow. Okay, let's get started though. Let's start to convert this thing. So I'm going to take this simple to-do app that we're looking at and take it from built-in state and into using React Redux. So first, I'm actually going to make a copy of this. So when I push the code up, this right here will be exactly as it is right now, but I'm just going to have a new folder under with Redux that is the app converted. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy the folder. So let's copy recursively no Redux / to-do app into with Redux / to-do app. Actually, I'm going to go get a beverage. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back with Tangerine LaCroix. Okay, so that copied this to-do app folder. Visual Studio Code is not updating. Let's refresh it. Cool. So now we took that to-do app from with no Redux, copied into this with Redux, and now we're going to start updating things. James in the chat just asked, how often is Redux used with non-React apps, or is that even possible? It's absolutely possible. Like if you check out their docs, somewhere in here, it basically says Redux is really just all about state management. You typically see it used with React, but you could use it with Vue, you could use it with Angular, you could use it with jQuery if you really wanted to. It is a state management pattern and doesn't really care how you actually take that state and put it into your UI. So yeah, it's possible. I don't know how often, but definitely people use Redux with other things as well. Okay, so we've got this to-do app folder. Let's just do a quick tour. So we've got our source directory. We've got our index.js that brings in our app component and mounts it on root. If we look at our app component, we have this component called to-do app, that has all of the functionality inside of it, and it's just being mounted as kind of like the top level component inside of app. And then if we look in the components directory, to-do app has all of the functionality. So to-do app has its initial state, which is the message at the top of the page, the title, new to-do, which is keeping track of what's inside of the input, and then to-dos, which is the array of to-dos that we'll be updating. There are lots of different methods that update state. So new to-do change updates new to-do inside of state whenever the input changes. Form submitted will create a new to-do and put it into the array. Toggle to-do done will take the specific index of a to-do and change its done property to true. And then remove to-do will remove it out of the array. And then all done will go over every single to-do and set it to true. So all of this is defined inside of our top level component. And then in our render function, we have a form, which we're passing the state of the input down to. We're passing two functions. One will get called whenever the input changes, and the other one will get called when the form is submitted. And then we also have this to-do list component, which passes down the array of to-dos, and then the two functions that are needed inside of the to-do to toggle it as done and remove that specific to-do. If we look at new to-do form, this is a presentational component. It's also known as a pure functional component, stateless. It's literally just a render function. So the new to-do form takes in its props, which are the new to-do changed and form submitted, and then it returns a view that uses those two values from its props. Cool. And then if we look at to-do list, this is just an unordered list that maps over its props. So this is also a presentational component, maps over the array to create a new to-do item for every object inside of the to-dos array. And then to-do item itself is another component that will take in the to-do, the key, and then the two functions, toggle to do done and remove to do, and then to do item just renders out a list item. So it will show, a button, a checkbox for toggling that to do done. It'll show the title of the to do, and then a remove button, which calls the function two parents up to remove the to do from the array. So that's the basic layout of the app. We are now going to convert this thing into Redux. And William in the chat is asking, is Redux similar to ViewX? Absolutely. So if you're familiar with Vue.js and kind of like the Vue.js ecosystem, when you're using ViewX, it follows a very similar pattern to Redux. One of the main differences, though, is in Vue.js, because of the reactivity system, you can mutate state. So you can actually change properties on state, but it knows when those things happen, so things still work. In Redux, state is immutable, meaning anytime we need to make an update, we make a copy of state and then change the things that need to change. But yeah, you can think of Redux and Vuex as kind of two sides of the same coin. Does that make sense? I don't know what that analogy really means, but that should be it. Okay, so let's start adding React Redux to this app. So we are going to add these packages. We need Redux. We need React Redux, which gives us the functionality to connect the store to our React components, and then Redux Logger, which gives us a nice log of all the different actions that are happening in our app. So inside of this folder, so I'm going to go into with Redux and then go into the to-do app. I'm going to add all of those dependencies. Cool. So now we've got them all. Let's create a basic store. So inside of the folder here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call this store.js. Inside of here, we need our initial state. So I'm going to create a variable. We'll call it initial state, and this is just an object. Now this is synonymous, exactly the same as the state that you created inside of your component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the state defined inside of our to-do app and move that into the store. So I'm going to take this, pull it out. Our component no longer has its own state, and now this is just going to be defined in the store. Oh no, I lost it. So take the state, put it in our store file. Now we're getting started. So this is the store. If we look back at that diagram, we have now created just a regular plain old JavaScript object that has all of our state inside of it. Now it's exactly the same as the state that was inside of the component, but we've just pushed it up to the store. Cool. And so we have that. Let's look at our README. Now we need a reducer. A reducer is a function that takes in the new state and some action that occurred. It then determines how to update the state. Right now, we're going to do something really simple. We're just going to return state. So whatever state got passed in, we're just going to return that right back to it. Right now, there's no way to update state. And one thing I'll do is set state to be initial state. So this is an ES 2015 feature to set a default parameter. Basically, when the app starts up, this will be our initial state. And then every time after that, the current value of state is what's going to get passed into the reducer. So simple function, takes in the state and some action, and then returns the new state. For right now, it just returns state as it is. And I'm going to export this. So is this complaining because it's not the... Oh, no, it should be fine. So export the reducer. Now we need to bring this reducer into our app. So first thing we need to do is render the app with the provider wrapper. So if we look in in index.js, this is where the app is getting rendered in. Here is where we want to bring in provider, and this is going to come in from React Redux. So I'm going to say import provider from React Redux. And essentially this allows us to use the store inside of our components. So what we'll do is instead of just directly rendering app, we're going to render our provider, put the app inside of there, and now we need to give the provider some store. Like this. But what is the store? The store simply starts off as our reducer. So we're going to pull this reducer into this file. So let's say import reducer from the store. And then we need create store, which is from Redux. So we'll import create store from Redux. And what we'll do is we'll create a store. So we'll say const store equals create store, and then pass in the reducer. Okay, and now this makes sense. So our app is wrapped in a provider. The provider has a store property, which is set to create store from Redux, where we just pass in our reducer function. Simple enough. Let's look at our README. Now, okay, so we took the state that was in this component, we pulled it out into the store. We've got a basic reducer, we've got our initial state. Now, how do we get this state back into the component? This is where connect comes into play. So now we want to connect the container to the store. So in here, I need to bring in connect. I believe this is in React Redux. And now I need to connect my component. So the way this works is instead of just directly exporting your top-level container component, you export connect invoked with your component. And then the first parameter is a function called map state to props. And essentially, this function will take in state from your Redux store and map it to props on the component. So this is going to be a simple little function, map state to props, that takes in state, then returns an object where each of the properties on the object are going to be a prop inside of the component. So what do we need from the store? All three things. We need the message, we need the new to-do, and we need the to-dos array. All right, let's take a quick break. Whew. Okay, so how do we get these three things into the component with map state to props? So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, did I call this message? Yeah, so I'll say message is state.message. And new to do is state.newToDo. And to-dos is state.todos. So all this function is doing is it's getting state. State will be our initial state. We're then saying, okay, what are going to be the props inside of this component that have access to state? And this is what they are: message, new to do, and to-dos. Now, inside of our render function, instead of using values from state like we were using before, now we want to use them from props. So I'll say this dot props dot message, this dot props dot new to do, and this dot props dot to-dos. Cool. So now, if you think about what we did, we took the state that was defined in here and pulled it out. We put it into the store, and now we're bringing that state back in, but instead it's going to be on our props. So let's see if this works. We might have some other things broken because of we don't have any of our actions or events hooked up yet, but let's see. Render reorder to top. What's happening? Import body of module. Okay. One thing is, because I copied this directory, I might have to reinstall dependencies. Let me just do this real quick. Did I already do this? Maybe I did. I don't know. Let's see. Errand start. Okay, cannot find module.store. Did I bring that in correctly? Let's see. No, I put that in the wrong folder, or did I? Yeah, so store needs to be in the source directory. That's why. So let's move it. So store should be at the same level as index, so that import makes sense. Cool. Source index.js, import in body of module, reorder to import first. What is this saying? Oh, it wants all of my imports before things start happening, I believe. Cool. Okay. So all we've done is taken the state defined inside of the component and then moved it up to the Redux store. Now, our app is working. So we have the title there. We have the array of to-dos here. We have new to-do, which is totally empty right now. But all of that is actually being brought in from the Redux store. Now, all of these other things are going to break. Like right now, I can't even type into the input because I need to update my things to be actions instead of just regular methods. But for the most part, we are now getting data from the store. Beautiful. All right, so we mapped state to props, and then we converted our render function to use those props instead of state. Cool. Now here comes the real work, is convert all of the change handlers to action types and reducers. Okay, so let's start with new to do changed. So this is just a simple method that takes the latest value of the input and sets new to do on state to be that. So we're going to recreate this as an action type, an action creator, and a reducer. All three things. Let's do it. So in the store, I first need an action type. So I'm going to call this a new to do changed. Now it's pretty common practice to store your action types just as constant variables, because then you don't have to worry about using strings all over the place. You can just use their name. The other thing is, right now you're going to see me set up all of this in a single file. Most React Redux apps that you see will have these split out into separate folders. I want to put it all in one place so it's kind of easier to see what's going on, and then I'll show with a more complex app how these things actually get split out. Okay, so we have our action type. We now need our action. So I'm going to create an object called actions that has some functions on it. And one of the actions I need is new to do changed. Now, what does the action take in? The payload, or like what should state be updated to be? And in this case, this is going to be the value of new to do. So whatever the user has typed into the input, that's where we're going to get passed into this action. An action just returns an object that has two things. The first is the type of the action. In this case, the type of this action is new to do changed. And then that object can have any properties on it. We're going to put just new to do there. And so now inside of our reducer, we'll have access to new to do, which is going to be what's passed in from the component itself. Okay, so we have our action type, we have our action. Now we need to handle this action inside of the reducer. So the way this will work is we'll have a switch statement. So I'm going to say switch over action.type. And I'll say the default, or if this action type wasn't found, is just return state as it is. Nothing happened, just give the state back to what it was. Otherwise, let's handle the new to do changed case. And what will happen is when this action gets fired, it will then get down to this reducer, and the case for the action type will be to new to do changed. Now we have to decide what to do given this this action that just happened. If we look in our to do, what we were doing before is just setting new to do to be that value. So that's what we need to do inside of here. So your reducer always returns a new state. So I'm going to actually return an object. I'm going to use object spread to take the existing values of state and put them on this object. So this is essentially a shallow clone of the object. It's like object assign. But in Redux, we always want to return a copy of state. We don't want to modify state. So return a copy of state. However, the new to do value on state will be action.newTodo. So this is going to take the new to do value that was passed into the action, put it as the latest value on state, and then everything else on state will remain the same. So this is our reducer that's handling that specific action. Now, how do we call this action from inside of our component? And the idea is we essentially want to replace the call to newtodoChanged to a call to our action, which will then go into our reducer and actually update state. So this is where map dispatch to actions comes into play. Sorry, map dispatch to props. So what this does is instead of putting state values as props, this will put actions as props, so we can just call them from our render function. So now, inside of here, I need to pass in a second function, which is map dispatch to props. And this is going to be a function that takes in dispatch and then returns an object of all of the actions we want available as props. So the action that I want available is newtodoChanged. So inside of my component, I'm going to call this on newtodoChanged. This is going to take in the newTodo. And what this will do is dispatch actions.newtodoChanged with newTodo. Now, where are actions? We need to bring them in. So in the store, where we have actions here, let's export them. So let's say export actions. And now inside of here, we need to bring those actions in so we have access to them. So I'm going to say import actions from, we'll go up one directory and then grab the store. So that will bring in the actions. So that's bringing in actions defined here. Then inside of here, we'll say on our props, we're going to have a prop called onTodoChanged where you can pass in newTodo, but that will then call actions.newtodoChanged. Let me just double check. Am I doing this right? I can look at one of our previous examples. Yes, I am. Cool. Now, one thing I didn't do, which I probably should do, is move this to-do app component into a folder called containers. So let's just do that real quick. So in the source directory, let's create a new folder called containers, and then take this to-do app from, wait, not in there, in here. Let's take to-do app from components and pull it into containers. Main reason why is so that when other developers come to our code, they know that anything in this folder is directly connected to the store. Anything in this folder is just a dumb presentational component. Cool. I will have to update a few things. So bringing this in now needs to come from components. So go up one directory, grab components. This is go up one directory and grab components. And then in our app, we need to make sure that we're pulling this in from containers instead. Okay, so all of that, we now have a prop called onNewTodoChanged, and this is what we want to call inside of our component instead of newTodoChanged. So I'll get rid of that. And then we're going to be passing down this.newTodoChanged, but instead we want to pass down this.props.onNewTodoChanged. So we're taking that action and passing it down. If we look at the form, onChanged is just simply calling props.newTodoChanged. But one thing I do want to do is actually pass in the value, because before we were passing in the value or just using event.target.value. So that is actually what I want to call this function with. So newTodoChanged with event.target.value. Okay, that should do it. Let's see. So our component no longer has the newTodoChanged function. We're now getting on newTodoChanged, which is mapped from our Redux store from its actions. That action has a type of newTodoChanged, has the latest value of newTodo, and then our reducer will handle when this action happens, what to update newTodo to be. Let's see if it works. All right, hard refresh. It's working, and I know it's working because it's actually letting me type into the input box, because the render function for the form actually renders out the value of props.newtodo. So we're calling change, it's updating state, that data is being passed back down, and then we're actually showing the latest value of newtodo. Now, how can I better visualize what's happening here? Let's use the Redux logger. So in our index.js, I did bring in this package called Redux logger, and this will actually log out all of the actions that get fired off to the console. So that's pretty convenient. So let's say import logger from Redux logger. And now I want to create my store, but I want to apply this logger as a middleware. So I need to bring in, I think it's apply middleware. We'll double check if I'm wrong, but so that needs to go there. And then we also want to pass in apply middleware with logger. So now our store has this logger middleware on it, so that it will log every action that happens to the store. React Redux does not contain an export called apply middleware. Let's cheat and see how to actually do that. Oh, it's straight from Redux. I tried to bring it in from React Redux. And then logger needs to be destructured. Okay, so bring in the logger from Redux logger, bring in apply middleware from Redux, and we're going to apply that logger middleware. Now we should see all of these things happen. So I type the letter L, we see a log to the console. So this tells us what action got fired, what was the previous state. So the previous state before this action was newtodo was totally blank. The action itself had a payload of newtodo with the letter L, and then the state after that was newtodo with the letter L. So now every single action that happens and every single change to state will get logged to the console. So learn Redux. And we see every single key down was actually updating the store under the hood. So this is one of the key benefits of using something like Redux, is it is keeping track of every single change to state, and you can actually see those changes to state. Now, this isn't the easiest thing to look at. There are also the Redux DevTools, and they have cool features like time travel debugging. So let me set that up. In here, this is the code you need. You can grab this if you look at the Redux DevTools GitHub repo. It'll tell you how to add it as a middleware. So we'll look in here. We also need to bring in compose, because we're essentially applying multiple middlewares. And so now, instead of just apply middleware logger directly, we'll say compose, and we want to compose apply middleware, and this little line of code that basically says if Redux DevTools extension exists, then we'll plug into it. And now we get this cool UI. So this will look very similar to the logs that we saw there, but we can better inspect the things that are happening. So learn Redux. Okay, so there we go. So we see every single thing that happened. We can see what was the previous value, what was the next value. We can see all of state, and we can see the actual action that got dispatched. The other cool thing, though, is time travel debugging. So I can go back to any one of these actions that got fired off and jump back to it. And now the entire state of my application goes back to when this action actually got fired off. And this is really great for debugging, because you want to know like why something is going wrong. So you can just jump right back to a previous thing. You can also jump back, and then if you do commit, that essentially gets rid of all previous actions, and now you're kind of just like stuck there. But now we can see all of those things logging. Pretty cool. So this is kind of the flow of working with Redux. You create an action type. You create an action, which will have the payload of that action type. You then create a reducer that will run whenever that specific action is dispatched. Okay, let's keep moving though. So we converted those method calls to call dispatch instead. Now we got to do the same thing for every single other method inside of our container component. So in here, what is another thing that we're doing? We're also doing form submitted. So let's convert this into an action. But what is this actually doing? This is adding a to-do, right? It is basically, and it's doing two things. It's setting new to-do to empty so it clears out the form, and it's also adding a to-do to the array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an action type called add to-do. So let's do that. So we go to the store, we create an action type, add to-do. Tofo, to-do, cool. So we have our action type. We now need our action creator. We'll call this add to-do. This will take in the to-do that we're going to be adding into the array. The type is add to-do, and we'll just pass in the to-do so we have access to it. Okay, now we need a reducer for when add to-do is called. So we'll handle this case here. And what we need to do is return a new state with all of the existing values of state. However, to-dos is going to be all of the values in state.todos with action.todo at the end of it. So this is a way of spreading the existing values of that array into this array here, and then putting action.todo at the end of the array. So to-do is going to be the payload of that action, so we're just putting it at the end of the array. So now that we have this action, we need to bring that into our component using map dispatch to props. So now we need on add to do. That will take in the to do. We'll then do dispatch. We'll pull in actions.add to do with the to do. And now we need to call our on add to do function inside of the component. Now, I'm going to leave form submitted there mainly because I need to prevent the default action. I don't really want to prevent the default action like inside of a reducer. So I'm going to do that here. And then we'll just directly call this.props. On add to do, and we'll pass in this new to do that we're trying to create. And now this comes from props instead of state. Cool. So form gets submitted, prevent the default action. Now dispatch this action, new to do, with this object as the to do. And we're actually using just the current value of new to do to create that to do, because that will be what the title is. Awesome. But if you remember, the other thing we were doing was emptying out the form. So for that, we just need to fire off another action. So I'll say this.props.new to do changed, and I'll just pass in an empty string. So this will add the to do to the array, and then this will clear out the form. All right, let's see what happens. So learn Redux, add to do. It broke. Let's see what went wrong. Cannot read property type of undefined. Array.forEach. On add to do line 90. Oh, let's see. So on our store, we have the add to do action creator. We have the add to do action. So am I saying actions.add to do? That's right. And then our reducer is looking at add to do. That looks okay to me. And then we should have access to on add to do. Here. Not quite sure where it's going wrong. Let's try to parse this error message. Oh, cannot read property type of undefined. I think the action was undefined. Let's see. So in our in our reducer here, I think this is where it's saying that action type is undefined. Let's see. Type init, new to do changed. And then when I click it, object add-on add to do cannot read property type of undefined. Okay, let's double check everything because I think I've somehow messed up getting my actions out of this component. So actions have add to, oh I'm not returning an object. Okay. So add to do is a function that returns an object. Silly mistake. There we go. Okay, so add to do returns a function with an object. Now this should work. And actually, let's get rid of that log of the action. And that's why it said cannot read property type of undefined. This function was returning nothing. So the type the return value was undefined, so there was no type. Okay, now learn Redux. Add to do, it adds it to the array. This.props.new, it's on new to do changed. So it adds it to the array, but one thing I also wanted to do was update the form to be empty. So this needs to be on new to do changed to clear out the form also. So we'll say learn Redux, add to do, gets fired off and then pushed into the array. Okay, on to the next one. Our next handler would be toggle to do done. So this toggles a specific to do to be either true or false. So in our store, we need a new action type, toggle to do done. If we look at that method, this needs the index of the to do and then whether or not it should be checked. So we need to pass in two values. So for our action, we'll say to do, we'll call it toggle to do done. We'll bring in a toggle object, and toggle will have index and whether or not that to do should be checked. So we'll return the type is toggle to do done, and then we'll pass in that toggle object. Whoa. Okay, so we've got toggle to do done. Now we need to handle this action type in our reducer. So here I'm going to have a case. And there's some pretty complex logic. I think we can copy most of it. Yeah, let's copy it. Because basically what we're doing is first creating a copy of the array, then creating a copy of that specific to do at that index with its done value overridden. So we can pretty much do this in our reducer. So to-dos is now a new array, and it's not this.state, it's just state. And then we want to grab the to-dos at action.toggle.index. Then action.toggle.index. And then done is going to be action.toggle.checked. So we're actually going to be passing in the index and whether or not it was checked. So we've now created a new array of to-dos that has that one specific to-do updated. Now we need to return a copy of state with to-dos overridden with this new value of to-dos. Okay, now we need toggle to do done inside of our component. So we will add this here. So I'll say on toggle to do done, grabs in the toggle information. We'll then dispatch actions dot toggle to do done. Jib says, I wish I was this good. I'm just drooling. It takes a lot of practice. I've worked with it enough that I have all these things memorized, but I would say don't be afraid to go to the docs. Don't be afraid to look at previous projects to see how you hook these things up. But really also what I'm showing is kind of like the flow of things, like create your action type, create your actions, create your reducer, pull your action creator into your component, use that instead, and repeat. And this is really the flow of Redux. Like, you're just creating these things over and over. Everything goes in here, and then you pull it into the component. And so then bring in toggle. Okay. So now we have on toggle to do done. Now we want to call that here. So we need the index and whether or not it was checked. We can do one of two things. We can say this dot props dot on toggle to do done, and we needed an object with an index and a checked property. And checked is event.target.value. We could do this, or we could go into the to do item component and just call those things in directly. I think we'll leave this up at the top level because that leaves our to do item still like minimal. It just passes up the event and the index, and the container is in charge of grabbing off the specific value. You can do it either way, but that's what I'm going to do. If we look in our reducer, it is looking at action.toggle.index and action.toggle.checked. So the thing we're passing back, this is going to be called toggle. It has an index and it has a checked value. Cool. That should work. Let's see what happens. Okay, so can I check a thing? I can. So it fires off the action, toggle to do done. The to-dos in the previous state, done was false for both of them, but this action had a payload which said index 0 should be checked. And here, now, done is checked. I think here's the issue though, because I'm using event.target.value, it's just like a string. Let's see what it gets set to whenever I uncheck it. Wait, did that work? Nope. Let's. Oh, I'm sorry. It's event.target.checked, not event.target.value, because we want whether or not the checked property is on there. So let's see. If I check that, now our action payload. Yeah. So now checked is true, and if I uncheck it, checked is false. Cool. Okay. So that's it for that one. I think we have like 2 more to convert. Now remove to do. So back to the store, we'll create the remove to do action type. We now need the remove to do action creator. So we'll say remove to do. This should just take in the index because we're going to splice it out. So we return an object with a type of remove to do, and we'll pass in the index. Okay, so now we need to handle in our reducer remove to do. It's my break timer. Let's take a quick stretch. Okay, so we're going to handle remove to do in our reducer. So here we're going to say the case is remove to do. And then we need to pull in that logic. So we simply just create a new array and then splice that one out and then set state. So we can get rid of remove to do altogether. And then in our store, we will create the new array, and that's just going to be state.todos. We're going to splice out action.index, and we're going to remove one of them. And then we need to return a new state with all the properties of existing state, but to-dos will be overwritten with this new array that is now missing a value. Okay, let's try it. Oh, actually, before we do that, we need to call it from props instead. So now instead of passing down this dot remove to do, we're just going to pass down this dot props dot on remove to do. And did I map it yet? I didn't map it. So now I need to map that action. Takes in the index, and then it will dispatch actions dot remove to do with the index. And we're passing down remove to do to the to-do list. To-do list is passing that down to remove to do, to the to-do item. And then when it calls it, it just passes in the index. So that should still work. So let's learn Redux. We'll add it. Good to go. Now let's check learn react. That still works. Now let's remove learn react, and that works too. And if we look at the Redux DevTools, we can see this. So remove to do shows us that the array of to-dos now has that one item removed from it, but the previous state was just toggling done, and we can actually jump back to that if we wanted to, or we could jump back to the latest version, which has it removed. Cool. I think the last thing is all done, or do I have anything else? Yeah, so the last one is this all done function, which when I click it will check everything on the page to be done, but it's broken right now because we have to create that action. So in the store, I need a all done action type. Now we need the action. And this action actually won't take in any parameters because it simply just marks everything as true. So it doesn't need any input into it to decide what to do. So we'll just say all done, and this is going to return an object with the type, which is all done. Okay, so now we handle that in our reducer. So here I have a case of all done, and we should be able to copy the logic. So yeah, we just map over to-dos to create a new array of to-dos, and then we'll set that back on state. So, and this doesn't need to be this dot, it's just state.todos. And basically it's creating a new to-do where every to-do has the done property of true. So we're going to return a new state with all the existing values of state, but to-dos will be overriding with these new to-dos where everything is marked as true. Last thing, we need to map this action. So I'll say on all done, and we will dispatch actions dot all done. And remember, didn't take any parameters because it's always just marking everything as true. And then we need to use that one instead. So I need to do this dot props dot on all done. And so now when I click this, it's calling the action inside of our store on all done. Okay, let's see what happens. All done. Yes. And I should be able to add new things like learn Redux, add, learn state management, add. Cool. And I can check individual things. If I uncheck all of these, we should see all of those actions are logged. And if I click all done, we see that was logged. And we see that it basically updated done to true on all of the existing to-dos. All right. This is React Redux. I'll take a step back and let's compare this with what it looks like without Redux. And yeah, let me just double check everything. Yeah, looks good. Let's look at our README. So we added action types for everything, we added actions for everything, and we added a specific reducer for all of the different action types. Let's compare. So let's save that. Okay, if we look at our regular plain old no Redux to-do app, and we look at our to-do app component, this component has state inside of it. And then all of the methods on it are calling this.setState to update state to be something specific, right? So everything is kind of happening inside of this component. We're still passing down functions to our nested components, but pretty much everything is happening inside of here. And if we compare that to our Redux app, this component has no state. And actually, because it has no state, I don't even have to call the constructor anymore. Just a basic component. Now, how it gets its state is from the store. So this connect function with map state to props, this is basically saying, take the state that's defined in the store and bring it as props into the component. So before we just did this.state, now we have to actually map state. And all of our state is inside of the store. So any properties on here we have access to map it as props. Cool. The other thing is anytime we want to make updates to state, instead of calling like this.setState inside of the component, we have to dispatch an action. So every action has an action name, You then have an action creator, just a function that returns an object with the type of the action, and then the payload, that is what needs to be updated. And then every action needs to be represented inside of your reducer. So when this specific action happens, update state to have some new value or be overwritten, or use whatever the payload was from action to update the state accordingly. So given each of these different action types, we update the state or create a new state with new values in it, new updates, according to the specific action that happened. Whereas if we look at without Redux, everything is just calling set state. So new to do changed, call set state and update new to do. Form submitted, we will clear out the form and put the to do at the end of the array. Toggle done, we'll set state with a new array where that specific to do is toggled as done. So everything is defined as a method and is just directly calling set state. Whereas with Redux, we kind of split things out. So instead of directly setting state, we fire off an action with a payload, which then goes into the reducer. It gets logged. We can see it in the Redux DevTools, and then creates a new version of state and then updates the UI. That's it. Awesome. So I am going to push up this code. So you're going to be able to compare it. And then also you could potentially try to convert this one to use Redux kind of as you watch the video. One thing I do want to do real quick is talk about API calls and async actions. So with this basic to-do app, everything is just happening locally, right? When we fire an action, it immediately updates the state with some new value. We don't have to wait. But when we're calling APIs or making asynchronous actions or doing asynchronous things, we have to handle that in a specific way. We can't just update the state inside of a reducer because we don't that asynchronous action may not have finished yet. So what I want to show is converting the React image search, which has just this one's going to be super basic to convert because it has a form with a search term, so we'll do the handle change. But then whenever the form is submitted, we make an API request to get all of the images. Should be a pretty easy conversion. And then I'll show some of the different things we can use to handle asynchronous actions. Anyone out there watching live, any questions, thoughts, comments about this stuff before I move on? And actually, I think it will be okay to commit to master because I am doing it in a separate directory, so you can compare the two. So I'm actually going to go ahead and push up the code. We talked about creating the store, talked about doing that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. Cool. Okay, that was fun. Let's move on to image search. So I'll show you how this app works. We'll go into no Redux, and then we'll go into the React image search, and then do a yarn start. Definitely, yeah, so Andy says, thanks for doing this. He voted for it. You're very welcome. It's been a long time coming. That specific option has been on the poll for a while, so hope this is what you needed, and if not, feel free to ask more questions. I need to kill this other app. Kill that, and then let's do a yarn start here. And actually, let's just go back to the diagram. We coded it up. Now think back to here. So store, that was just our initial state, the object, right? Provider, this was the component that wrapped our app. Container, this is the thing that connected to the store. We have all our components, our UI. Actions, these are things that have a type and a specific payload. Reducers, they take in an action type and then update the state with that payload. And then the store will push that state back down to anyone that was connected to it. Yeah? Redux is not so hard. I don't know. Okay. Let's see. For some reason, it's really hard to resize this thing. Go away. Okay. So the way this app works is you can search for some search term, loading bar, and then we get back the API requests. You can search for any kind of images. Cool. And this one was from the front end showdown. So I built this same app with Angular, React, and Vue, but I'm taking the React version so we can convert it to Redux. Okay, so I am going to make a copy of that folder. Let's kill this. I'm going to copy, and then we're going to paste in the Redux with Redux. Cool. So now we have React image search. Come on, File Explorer, show me my files. Code is misbehaving. I'm gonna quit it. Ah, it didn't copy everything. Okay, let's do this. Let's remove that. And then with Redux. Cool. And then let's go into no Redux, and let's copy recursively React image search. Go up one directory into with Redux, and let's put this folder, whoa, not that, into a folder called React image search. Cool. Okay, so we'll go up one, we'll go into with Redux. Now we have React image search. I am going to remove those. Whoa. Okay, thank God. I am going to remove those node modules and then just do another yarn to install them. I think the main thing with that is if you copy a folder with node modules inside of it, some of those node modules had like relative paths configurations in them. And so if you copy it over, it like breaks everything. So this should start back up for us. No errors, we're good to go. We can search for kittens. All is right with the world. All right, let's get started converting this thing. So same song and dance, we're gonna install the packages that we need. So I'm gonna do yarn add, Redux, React Redux, and Redux Logger. Now let's get things going. Code close. So now inside of the with Redux folder, inside of React image search, inside of the source directory, we're going to create a store.js file. Let's take a quick break. Whew. So inside of here, we need a new file. We're going to do store.js. We need our initial state. That is an object, but if we go into our main component, and this is a simple app, it doesn't have any nested components, so we can just grab this state directly from there. And now our store will have this initial state. Cool. And then we're going to export a function called reducer that takes in state and will initialize it as the initial state, and it also takes in the action. And then for now, we're just going to return state as it is. We have not modified it in any way. And now in index.js, we need to bring in create store. So import create store from Redux. And then we will... Andy wants to know, am I going to sing us a song about state management with the store? I should. I don't know if I want to try to come up with it off the top of my head, but maybe. So store will be create store, and then we need to pass in our reducer. So let's grab our reducer. From store. Cool. And then we'll pass our reducer in. And then now we need provider from React Redux. So we're going to import in provider from React Redux. And then we'll specify our provider here. Wait. Provider will render the app, but the provider needs access to the store. So store is there. Cool. And now we need to hook up the store to the component itself. So in here, we need to connect it. So I'm going to import connect from React Redux. And then now, instead of exporting just the app, we're going to export map state to props invoked with the app. Then we need our function map state to props. So we'll say function map state to props takes in the state, returns an object, which will be the prop added to the props on the component. And what are the things we need? All of these. So we need title, image, search, loading, and images. I'm going to copy these, but just to get the property names. So we want these, but title should come from state.title. Search term should come from state.searchTerm. Loading should come from state.loading. And images should come from state.images. Okay. Now, inside of our component in the render function, instead of bringing in all of these things from state, we just bring them in from props. Simple enough. When I coded that before, I used destructuring. So now that I have them in props, I'm just destructuring them from props instead of state. And now the render function is grabbing those things from props. Cool. So we reload the page. That's great. But now all of our event handlers will be broken. So I can't even type into this thing. I need to actually set up some actions. So first thing is setting the search term changed, or setting the search term when it changes. So let's create an action type. Search term changed. We'll then create our actions. That's going to be an object, and we'll say search term changed is a function that takes in the search term and then returns an object where the type is search term changed, and search term will be on there as the payload. Okay, and now we need to handle when search term changed inside of our reducer. So we'll have a switch statement on action.type. And we'll say the default case is to just return state as it is. And we'll say the case where search term changed, we want to set search term on our state. So I'm going to say return state with all of its existing values. However, search term will be action.searchTerm. So that should update the search term in the state. And now we need to call search term changed, or we need to map search term changed to a prop so we can call it from inside of our component. So we now need map dispatch to props. And we'll say function map dispatch to props. We get dispatch. We want access to on search term changed, and this is going to take in the search term, and we should dispatch actions dot search term changed with the search term. And we need to bring in our actions into this file. So in this file, we will import actions from the store. Store does not contain an export named actions, so let's fix that. Let's also export actions. Okay, so now we have that function. Now let's use it instead of our handler. So we have on search term changed, and now event.target.value. Let's just do this here. So we'll say this dot props dot on search term changed with event.target.value. And now we can get rid of this search term changed. Okay, that should do it. So now puppies. So the UI is updating because it's actually updating state. Let's bring our logger in there so we can actually see that happening. So in index.js, we will bring in logger from Redux logger. And then we need apply middleware from Redux. And so right after the reducer, we say apply middleware with the logger. And now we should get some logging of those actions. So puppies, cool. Briggs says he only knows Vue. I would say you really only have to know one. Like, as long as you can build apps, that's great. Pick one. It is good to have maybe experience with these other things, so like you know why you're using what you're using, or you have reasons why you're using what you're using instead of just using it blindly. But yeah, I learned Angular 1 as my very first front-end framework, and then learned React after that, and then eventually learned Vue.js. But now I've come to like love Vue.js. But I did do React for like over a year. And Paradise in the chat says he only knows C, or she only knows C. That's fine. Okay, so we're updating state. We're logging. That's great. All right, let's keep on updating these, putting the stuff in the store. So another action that we need is, this is where the async stuff will come into play. So, well, first let's create a loading set loading action. So we'll say set loading. We then need a set loading, which will take in loading, which is either going to be true or false. We will return an object where the type is set loading and loading is the payload. And then we'll handle this in the reducer. So when the case is set loading, we just want to return state as it is, but loading will be the latest value, which is action.loading. Cool. So that should set loading. Now let's bring it into the component. So on map dispatch, I need on set loading with the loading value. This will dispatch actions dot set loading with loading value. And now I need to call onset loading anywhere where I was changing loading to true or false. So really, that's just right here. We'll say this.props.onset loading to true. And now this is where like async actions come into play. Now you'll notice this right here is making an API request. If we look at that API file, this is just returning a fetch, which returns a promise. So the first thing I'm going to show you for handling asynchronous actions is this Redux promise middleware. And basically what it allows you to do is, instead of your action creators just having a simple payload, you can set the payload to be a promise. And then whenever that promise is resolved, it automatically fires off that action. So let's use that first. I like this one for beginners because you don't really even have to think about thunks or some of this other stuff, excuse me. But I will show it how to do it with thunks also. But first thing, let's just get Redux promise middleware. If we take a look at that, we can see their docs. So basically our action now has a payload that is something that needs to be resolved. So let's install this. I believe we can just do an npm install of Redux promise middleware. So make sure we're in the React image search folder. And then we'll do yarn add Redux promise middleware. Okay, so now that we have the middleware, we need to use it. Let's go to the introduction on their docs. And we need to use the apply middleware function. But remember that we're already using the logger middleware, so this is where we need to use, wait, actually, I think we need to use compose. No, actually, I think we can just pass it in. So let's bring in promise middleware in our index.js. And then when we apply middleware, can it just be comma separated? Let's see. Well, actually, here, I'll bring that one in first, because if our logging breaks, then we know that that's not how you do this. So apply middleware with promise middleware and our Redux logger package. Okay. And then also we're getting a useless constructor. So now that we moved all of the state into the store, we don't need a constructor on our app component anymore. Okay. Let's see if this works now. So we applied the middleware, and now we should just be able to create an action where the payload is a something that returns a promise. So here's what we'll do. We'll say a pending action is immediately dispatched. So, okay, so the type, you just say, what is the thing that you're about to do? So we're going to make an API request for images. So I'm just going to call the type images. And this middleware automatically fires off images pending, images fulfilled, images rejected. And we'll handle images fulfilled in our reducer. So in the store, we need a new action. Let's call this get images. And we'll need the search term. Yeah, we'll need the search term. And then we'll return an object where the type is images. And the payload is our actual API request. So in here, we want to grab api.search from our API file and actually bring that into the store. So inside of here, let's import the API. And now the payload will be api.search with search term. So when we fire this off, it's actually going to make the API request, and then we should be able to handle it with images fulfilled. So let's see. Let's try to do that. We'll take a quick break, but then we'll need a reducer for images fulfilled. Okay, so here, let's do the case of images fulfilled. Let's just return state as it is, but I do want to log the action so we can see if we get access to the payload. That, did I spell fulfilled right? I think I did. Let's see what happens. So now we need this get images action inside of our component. Let's bring that in. So we'll say on get images. This takes in the search term. And then we'll dispatch actions dot get images with that search term. Now, instead of directly calling the API, we're just going to say this.props.on get images with this.props.search term. So that fires off the action to tell it to make the API request. Then when it fulfills, we should get access to the array of images in our payload. So let's see what happens. Images fulfilled is not defined, right, because I was trying just to use a variable name this. We need to wrap it in quotes because we don't have a constant for that action type. Oh yeah, and then in our app, we don't need API anymore, so we can pull that out of there. All right, puppies, search, and we can see, where can we see it? Yeah, okay, so we see it. So the images fulfilled action was fired, and the payload is literally the array of images. So in images fulfilled in the reducer, we can actually set that on state. So let's do that here. We'll say return an object with all the current values of state, but images is going to be action.payload. So that will be the latest images. And then we'll also set loading to false. Now, I think one thing I want to do is, instead of having this specific set loading, we could do tap into images pending, because then we know to set loading to true. That might make the most sense. I'll just leave this for now. Let's see what we get. So if we search for puppies, search loading, and we get back our puppies, right? And if we look at the Redux DevTools, oh, we haven't set those up, so we can really only look at the console logs, but previous state was images was an empty array and loading was true, and then after this, images is a full array and loading is false. Cool. There is a question in the chat from Briggs. I'm having trouble on how to make a full stack app, especially on file structuring. What should I do next, and what module should I include? Yeah, definitely. I do plan to do a pretty soon, because I reached 1,000 subscribers. I want to do a 8-hour live stream, and I want to build a full stack app in one really big long live stream. And yeah, I'll talk about file structure and architecture and where do things actually go. And yeah, the second comment, tutorials often differ from each other, making it difficult to compare them. Yeah, I mean, for the main part, you really just got to focus on one and figure out what's happening there, and then try to extrapolate, and really try to pick the one that makes the most sense to you. Chris G, late to the party again. Welcome. Let's see. Cool. So we just got asynchronous actions working. I think one thing I want to do is, instead of having this separate set loading function, let's do images pending. And that will just be that. So now we no longer need a set loading action. And then in our component, we don't need to call set loading, because when we get the images, it automatically says the request is pending, so it should set loading to true. And then we don't need set loading anymore. So that should still work. Get back our kittens. Cool. And I guess the other thing we could do is, when the images are pending, we also want to set images to an empty array, because we just made a request. Let's clear out the existing results while the request is happening. And I guess you couldn't have seen that before, but basically what happens is, if we search for kittens, they're there. But if I search for mountains, kittens are still down at the bottom for a split second before the array gets overwritten. So when it's pending, if we set the array to empty, then it will clear all of those out. So if I do mountains, cool. All right, so that was this asynchronous actions getting set up with the Redux Promise middleware. Basically what it allows you to do is have an action where the payload is something that returns a promise. And then whenever this promise is resolved, it automatically fires off a new action that you can take care of inside of your reducer. So that's that. I think the last thing I do want to show is potentially Redux Thunk. I might just look at the docs for Redux Thunk so you can see how it works. And then I'll kind of show a more complex app, because all of the apps I built today, I put everything for Redux in a single file. But most of the apps you'll see actually have all of these things separated out into different files. So you have your action types file, you have your actions file, you have your state file, you have your reducer file. You might even have multiple files for every reducer. So I have an app that's slightly more complex, so you can see what that layout is. But let's look up Redux Thunk real quick. Thunk middleware for Redux. Okay, so we bring it in. Why do we need this? If you're not sure whether you need it, you probably don't. I think the main thing is if you're doing anything asynchronous, you need Redux Thunk. So the Redux Thunk middleware allows you to write action creators that return a function instead of an action. So our action creators are simply just returning objects. These are our action creators. They're just returning objects. And the Thunk middleware will let them actually return a function, which then allows them to do something that might be asynchronous. So instead of simply just returning an object, you return a function that gets access to dispatch, which then will call dispatch whenever the async function is done, so that the outside world knows that this asynchronous action is ready to go, and the reducers will get called. You can use this, and you would essentially use this instead of the Redux Promise middleware, but it's super simple to get set up with Redux Promise middleware, and if that works for you, I would say go with that, because you're not really dealing with as much functions, and it's a little bit more code to write, because you still have to do a dispatch inside of your asynchronous action creator. Cool. Yeah. I've been streaming for like a little over an hour and a half, so I do kind of want to start wrapping it up. So last thing is we'll take a look at a Redux app that is more complex than this. Okay, so if we look at campsite list. So I actually have this defined two ways. So in no Redux, we see campsite list. It's basically, it's almost like a to-do app, but instead of just one field, there's like title, description, and location. So there's change handlers set up for all of those things. So there's a bit more going on. But basic app here. So this is the without Redux version. Basic app there. We've got the app, which has the campsites component. We look in components. Campsites has a campsite form and a campsite list. And then the initial state just has some a few campsites inside of it. And then the form has a place to add a new campsite. So it has name, location, and description. But the form itself has state inside of it, which is the state of the form. And then whenever you add a campsite, it just passes up an object to the parent component, which then pushes it into, well, not pushes it, adds it to the end of the array, to a copy of the array. And then the campsite list just lists out all the campsites. So when I converted this to Redux, I put everything in the same store. So if we look in here, if we look at our index.js, so this got set up similar to a similar way. So we have our console logging middleware, and we also have our React DevTools middleware. You notice this is using Compose, so that allows us to use both of those. And if we look at app.js, it's bringing in the campsites container and just loading that in. And if we look at containers, that just has campsites inside of it. So one thing to show, though, is when we're setting up our reducers, we're pulling in the root reducer from the reducers folder. And the way this is structured is you could actually have multiple containers that each have their own reducer, but then your root reducer combines all of those reducers into one, so you can set it up with the app. So the apps I showed were super simple. They just had one reducer. This is structured so that you could potentially add multiple reducers. If you look at reducers, index.js exports combine reducers, which is a built-in function to Redux, with the campsites reducer defined in there. So this file is almost exactly equivalent to the file I was creating before, but now you could actually put other reducer files in here, maybe a reducer for the form if you wanted to, and then add it to combine reducers, and then you get access to two separate reducers. In here, we have our initial state, just like before, and then we have our reducers defined inside of here. However, the action types are actually defined in a separate file. So if I look at actions and then campsites, we can see that the action types were exported from here, And then also the action creators are exported from here. And then if we look at the container, it imports the specific names of the functions from that actions folder. And then down at the bottom, when it connects, it just uses those functions directly. So this app is doing, I mean, being hooked up to the store in a very similar way. However, the things have been split up into separate folders. So instead of just like one store file, you have your actions folder, your components folder, your containers folder, your reducers folder. And now this actually allows you to build a larger app where all of your store wouldn't have to be in a single file. You can start to modularize and pull things out so that the larger your app gets, it's still easier to manage. So just wanted to show that. All of this code is on GitHub. So you can compare, take a look, give it a try. I guess one thing I didn't mention is the campsite list with Redux is not finished. So if you want to take a look at the app itself, it has a set new campsite name reducer, but we don't have set description, set location. So you can go into this and add the other actions that we need. So you're going to need to create action types. You're going to need to create actions that will set description and set location as well. Awesome. I think that's all I have for you. This has been an intro, an overview of Redux for React. Like I said, links in the description, but I'll push all of this code up so you can see it, take a look, give it a try yourself. Let me check some boxes. So I did do this. I did that. We did this, but we didn't do Redux Thunk or Redux Saga. And then Redux Saga is just another way to handle asynchronous actions, but using generators and yield. Cool. And I did, this was a potential stretch, but to talk about the context API. I'm not going to do that today, but you can look into it. So if you look into the React 16 context API, this is a new API coming out of for React where people are talking about potentially it will replace Redux. I don't know. I haven't done a lot of research myself, but I have like I think Wes Boss put a video out there on just like basics of the context API, but this is something else to look into because more modern React apps might actually start using this instead of Redux. There are still going to be lots of Redux apps out there. That's not going away anytime soon, but potentially newer apps might be using the context API instead. So I'll link to this. I'll link to like Redux Sava so you can take a look, but this has been awesome. I did post a thank you video. So my channel reached 1,000 subscribers last night. 1,014, awesome. So I applied to be a YouTube partner, which would allow me to monetize the channel, enable super chat, and just maybe allow me to make a living off of doing this instead of just doing it randomly. But I did post a thank you video. Thanks everyone for subscribing. Thanks everyone for tuning in. More to come. As I mentioned, I will have an announcement soon of what will be and when is the 8-hour stream. I'll have giveaways. It's going to be awesome. But again, Michael says, awesome stream. Thank you, sir. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, and Briggs is suggesting or requesting maybe a mimed map architecture. Yeah, it'd be good to just take a step back and see like how are all these things connected? Like where is the store and how are these actions getting called? That kind of thing. But definitely awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Tomorrow I am going to be doing morning tea at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time, but also at is it 3 p.m. Mountain Time. Brooks from Brooks Builds is going to come join me to pair, and we're going to build a breakout or like brick breaker game with P5.js. So be sure to tune in for that. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are in the world. I'll see you next time. Here's this.